This paper brings together two topics, one very old and well-established, and one that's new and emerging. The old topic is corporate valuation. Everybody's talking about how you look at a corporation and value it. The new topic is customer valuation. Can we look at individual customers or groups of customers and say what they're going to be worth in the future? What this paper is all about is bringing the two together in a really rigorous and practical real-world way. Can we do corporate valuation from the bottom up by looking at the value of current and future customers, adding all that up and saying, that's the value of the corporation. That basic idea has been around for a while. It's been done by a few marketers in the past, but it's never had the real rigor to win over the respect of, let's say, financial people and accountants. That's what we're trying to do the right way. So it's customer-based corporate valuation, but done with all the rigor, with all just the really high standards and careful use of data that accountants and financial professionals would respect.
There really have been kind of two silos of work here, the one in the marketing domain and the one in the financial domain. And the financial domain has really kind of hammered home how you value a business by projecting forward free cash flows, discounting those back, doing all those kind of nitty-gritty little financial details, all in a very precise and theoretically correct way. And so we want to make sure to really draw upon that, take this problem that really has been solved in finance and apply it in this marketing domain, where perhaps some of the financial details have been a little bit looser.
One of the really interesting aspects of this research is that we did this valuation exercise for Dish Networks, big publicly traded company. Many people, especially in the U.S., would have heard of it. The most interesting part about it is that we have had no contact with anyone at Dish Network. I have never exchanged emails, phone calls, gotten data from anyone at Dish. This is using purely publicly available data. So the data that we use, anybody could get access to. And in fact, the methods that we're using are fairly common and transparent as well. So there's really no secret sauce, black magic here. It's just taking publicly available data, reasonably well-established methods, but just combining them in what one might call a clever but at least thoughtful way in order to come up with this kind of valuation. And because we've done it in this case for a company, again, that we've had no contact with, there's no reason why we couldn't repeat this exercise for other companies that make similar kinds of data available.
Yeah, the other thing that we're going to do to kind of capitalize on, we think is a very fundamental methodology here is make all this available. Both we're going to be collecting data not only on Dish Network, but also on many other companies that also disclose the sort of metrics that we need to perform customer-based corporate valuation. So we're going to release the data, make that available to everyone so they can perform the same exercises themselves, and also release the methodology so that people can actually implement these models too. We really want to democratize this and make this kind of core concept of valuing the company by valuing the customers widespread. Yeah, so we decided to perform work on Dish Network really kind of by happenstance. There was no cherry picking involved. We didn't say, let's find all the companies that this works for and then whittle it down to the ones where our model fits. No. We basically just picked Dish just because it was one of the first companies that we happened to find a decently long time series for. We actually didn't even know how long the time series was when we first began working on the company. So we definitely have a very kind of, I almost call it like a pipeline type procedure for whittling down and identifying companies that you could perform this analysis on. I think that process in and of itself has been quite interesting. Basically, we identify a universe of companies. There's all the companies in the stock market. And some percentage of them basically say words in their filings, specifically the 10K and the 10Q, that indicate that they may release customer data, the sort of customer metrics that we would need. So we identify all those companies, and we then go down and perform this validation step where we kind of whittle those companies down to the list that actually disclose the metrics. And now we have a team of great Wharton students here in undergrad, as well as a few colleagues in India who've been working with us to actually turn that into raw data sets for each of those companies. So Dish is just one example, but there's many others. We found at least 35 that also disclose the sort of data that we would need to fit these models for.
So the real key here would be what kinds of statements companies put out about the number or the nature of their customers. It could be how many customers they've acquired or how many customers they have at the end of the period. Some companies will go further and say something about their retention rate or their churn rate and some kind of derived measure that takes some of the raw count data and turns it into some kind of more diagnostic metric. We would rather work with the raw data. We just want to know how many customers came in, how long they stayed around, how many were there at any given point in time. Right now, there are absolutely no standards for disclosing any of this data or how it would be disclosed. One of the things that we want to do is to start to create some of those standards. It's not the objective of this particular paper, but if we can shine light on the value of these customer metrics and how they can be useful to marketers, to finance people, to people throughout organizations, then maybe we'll start to have a conversation about which metrics would be reported, how they would be defined, how often they would be reported, and standards around the derived metrics that come off of them as well. So it's very, very early, and none of that has really happened yet in any kind of formal way, but we're hoping that this is the first step in that direction.
I'd say the big one is the procedure really does work. You can perform this, you can project out the cash flows, but now we're augmenting that kind of core financial model that you would use if you were just working at an investment bank, incorporate this customer metric data, and use that to get an even more precise estimate of how much these companies are worth. We arrived at a price that was within something on the order of 5% of what the company had been trading at the time they disclosed the filing that we would have used to train our model on. So we were very happy with the fact that, without really any sort of jimmying around with the numbers, we were able to come up with a very sensible valuation for the firm. There were a number of other interesting findings. For example, you really do need to allow for the fact that different customers are different from each other. You have some who are valuable, some who are not so valuable, some who want to leave immediately and some who are going to stay around for a very, very long period of time. So even though these companies don't disclose this sort of data, we were able to infer that Dish, for example, they had a kind of a hardcore loyal segment of about 15% of the customers that have been around for over 10 years, just very, very long term. So by allowing for different customers to have different values, we arrived at a much higher valuation than we would have had we done kind of the standard thing within marketing, which is to kind of assume that all customers are kind of like the average customer. That would kind of leave you with a price that's much, much lower than what the company had been selling for at the time.
Anyone who knows my work knows that I celebrate heterogeneity. I love to find and exploit and explain and talk about the importance of differences across customers. This project is quite different because we have no direct indications of heterogeneity. We have no ability to track individual customers to say, oh, this one left after a month, this one left after 10 years. We have no data like that. We just have aggregated counts of how many customers came in at a given time and how many were present at the end of a given period. We need to infer the heterogeneity. We need to fit models to this very poor, very sparse, overly aggregated data and infer our best guess about how the customers differ from each other. Not only is that essential for us to come up with accurate valuations, but it leads to all kinds of very, very useful diagnostics that managers, whether it's of Dish Network or another firm, could really make great decisions from. So for instance, we think about the 80-20 rule, that a small fraction of our customers are going to capture a disproportionate value from the corporation. It's a really valid concept. I spend a lot of my time trying to take a company's internal data to try to uncover the 80-20 rule. Is it really as concentrated as 80-20, or maybe it's less concentrated than that? In this case, we don't have the data to do that, but we do it anyway. Because we're building really good models on the sparse data, we can still make inferences about how long different kinds of customers have stayed around. We find out in this particular case, our best guess is that it's far less concentrated than 80-20, but still there's a good deal of heterogeneity, and if we ignore it, our valuations and our ability to make kind of action-oriented statements about the company would be way off. One of the most interesting conclusions from our work actually doesn't appear in the paper. In a lot of the work that I do, we like to make hold-out forecasts. Let's look at the models that we've built and project what sales or whatever is going to be in the future and see how well we do. And we tend to do pretty well. But in this case, besides just coming up with forecasts on our own, there already exists a universe of forecasts, which is to say Wall Street analysts. So we have thousands of Wall Street analysts, or at least dozens of people who on a very regular basis are making statements about what the earnings of Dish Network or any publicly traded company is going to be 1 quarter, 2 quarters, sometimes 2 years from now. Well, we can compare our models against their own models or judgment or forecast. And keep in mind, these are people whose jobs depend on coming up with reasonably accurate forecasts. So one of the things that we did, and again, because the paper is so rich, there's so much going on, we actually didn't include it in there, but we're always happy to talk about it, is we compared our own forecast to those of the Wall Street analysts, and on average, they were actually considerably more accurate. As showing that, not to say that the Wall Street analysts do a bad job, but some of these very simple marketing models applied to relatively simple, sparse data can do at least as good a job as folks who have access to the CEO and data that we couldn't even imagine having.
Yeah, the crux of this work is really coming up with customer lifetime values. So we're going to take our crystal ball out and we're going to project forward what every customer is going to do into the infinite future. And really that's kind of what's driving this model for what revenues are going to be and thus what the stock price is going to be. And what's most surprising is that even when we're making such short-term forecasts, we're able to do so well. So essentially to come up with a stock price, that's more of a long-term game. But we're actually able to do very well kind of doing short-term predictions as well. So that was definitely very striking to me.
I've been spending a lot of time lately talking about customer centricity, trying to get companies to understand that there's gold in their hills when it comes to the customer data, and it can not only improve their marketing practices, but pretty much every part of the organization. We can make better decisions about how our salespeople are doing, about what kind of products we develop, how well our production people are doing, and on the finance side as well. So for me, this idea of customer-based corporate valuation has been kind of a holy grail I've been going after. That if I can win over the CFO and other people who are running the finance, accounting, and control parts of the business, then I can get these strategic ideas of customer centricity to spread much more broadly, much more impactfully throughout the organization. So for me, it really is reaching out and saying, hey, finance guys, a lot of the stuff that I've been talking about to the marketing people, it's relevant for you too, and it will help you make better decisions about your company and maybe your competitors. And so there I've been really happy to see the results, but of course it's much more than just that.
Yeah, one of the other kind of practical implications is, kind of just speaking from a financial standpoint, I've been at a hedge fund for a number of years before coming back, seeing the light and going to academia. So you can take the Wharton kid out of finance, but you can't take the finance out of the Wharton kid. But you could definitely construct some sort of a trading strategy to be able to exploit this data systematically across all the companies that disclose it. So again, there's on the order of, say 50, 100 companies, let's say, in the entire universe who disclose enough data to be able to construct some sort of customer-based valuation model. The idea would be you could find some companies that seem overvalued and some that seem undervalued just by the results that the models entail for each of those individual companies. So buy the ones that are cheap, sell the ones that are expensive. You're not taking on any real risk. I think such a strategy could be potentially very interesting. And in turn, that makes it very interesting for the executives of those firms, knowing that people are buying and selling their stocks based on this information. So the whole idea of standardizing these metrics, making sure that you're improving the health of your business kind of from a bottoms-up way, making sure your customer metrics are strong, I think it just reinforces something that they really probably know they should be doing in any case.
As Dan mentioned, there's all kinds of interesting hedge fund possibilities, and a lot of folks who are managing hedge funds or working with corporate valuation in other ways have been looking very carefully at this work. I want to say right now that I'm a marketing guy. I have no intention of developing a hedge fund. If other folks want to take this research and do it, that's great. I'll find that really rewarding, even if I don't have a piece of it. For me, it's more about corporate strategy more generally. It's more about making better use of the data assets that we have. For me, the big payoff would be if folks with hedge funds and other investors go pounding on the doors of other public corporations saying, you must reveal some of these other customer-oriented metrics, that we can't make the right decisions unless you do so. And maybe for accounting standards boards to start to make some noise about that as well. So if we can change the kind of data that's being put out there and the kind of conversations that are having, beyond just the making money thing, I want going to change business practices and the kinds of data that we look at and the way that we use it?
I'd say one other very practical implication is there's a whole budding stream of research about basically if I'm going to spend marketing dollars to acquire customers, should I take that hit on my income statement immediately, or should I capitalize that as an asset because I'm acquiring these customers who are worth a lot of money? Part of our research is showing just how valuable these customers are, and one of the implications is they're going to stay around for a very long period of time. So we come up with an estimate that the average customer at Dish is going to remain a customer for about 5.5 years. That's very, very I'm And you have some customers who are going to be around for over 10 years. So if I'm going to spend subscriber acquisition expense dollars, I'm investing in an asset. These customers are assets, but they're not acknowledged as such. So I think over 80% of Dish's subscriber acquisition costs are immediately expensed. And as a result, they kind of take the hit, and profits don't look as good in the short term. So there's been work by people like Shubha Srinivasan at Boston University who are kind of saying that doesn't really jive with the underlying economics of the business. If I'm going to spend money and I'm going to basically acquire an asset, I should be able to recognize the asset and kind of have the expense associated with the asset bleed away as the asset's value bleeds away. So we think that this kind of dovetails very nicely with that stream of research.
We see these ginormous acquisitions taking place in many cases where one company is buying another largely because of their customer base. So you can think about when Facebook bought WhatsApp, or just endless rumors about Yahoo and AOL. We're just buying the customer base. But what are those customers worth? Well, that's what this research is all about. And it's interesting to see sometimes in the press, you'll see kind of back-of-the-envelope calculations about what one customer base is worth. And they're appalling. The analyses that they're doing are terrible. The numbers that they're coming up with are way, way off. So we like the idea that people are having that kind of conversation, but we want to make it a little bit more educated. We want the answers to those questions to be as rigorous as the kinds of things that we would expect to see in a conversation about finance and accounting, not kind of lightweight approximations that might be associated more with marketing.
Yeah, so one example that's been in the news lately is kind of on the topic, Dish Network. They're in the news about potentially being acquired or merging with another company. So they've been in the news themselves of trying to find a partner in some way to move forward. So I think this is a perfect example of how customer-based corporate valuation could be useful actually for the company that we specifically are looking at. Now, our research is all about valuing the customers. So all these other assets that the company may have that really aren't coming from the value of the customers, we'll leave that to the finance guys. But specifically for the value of the customers, we think there's real gold in basically looking at them kind of the way that we are. And all the better if we had internal company data. We could just make those forecasts even more precise. But we think even with Dish Network itself, there's definitely real potential to think about it in this way. Yeah, I'd say perhaps one of the biggest misperceptions that we've seen is not acknowledging the paramount importance of the value of the customer to the value of the firm, and really establishing that link and then just focusing on the value of the customers. I'd say perhaps one of the most striking examples of this is just in the accounting rules themselves. So if a company was to buy a chair and put it right down over here like we're sitting in now, they would be able to capitalize that as an asset on their balance sheet, and they don't recognize an expense immediately. But if I was to spend money to acquire a customer, that customer doesn't show up anywhere. They're called an intangible asset. And one of the interesting byproducts of our research is that for Dish for example, these customers are expected to basically stay with the firm for about 5.5 years. So they have very, very long, useful lives. And in fact, with Dish in particular, their example of the chair is the actual dish itself. So the money that they spend on these dishes that you see, they're able to capitalize, and they have a useful life of only 4 years. So actually, you have this kind of striking example. It's like a tale of two worlds, that you have this kind of inert object that has a short useful life. I'm able to capitalize that. But here are these valuable customers that are generating cash flow over very long periods of time, and I need to expense that immediately. So we think that's really something that should be looked into more carefully.
Another important point that the paper addresses would be the gap, or I'd rather say the synergy, between marketing and finance. That marketers will often talk about this idea of customers as assets. We'll often say, almost just in a purely conceptual way, that if we add up the value of the customers, boom, we get the value of the corporation. And while it's a nice idea, we haven't seen work so far that has really won over the finance and accounting community to say, yeah, you know what, there really is something there. Now, I'm happy to say that there have been a few mavericks in finance and accounting who have been saying some of these words, but it hasn't really become mainstream yet. We're hoping that this paper, not because it's coming out of marketing, but just because of the rigor involved on the data side, on the analysis, on the substantive implications, is going to win over broad interest from folks in all different business disciplines and say, you know what? The marketing folks really do have something to add to the finance and accounting conversation. And of course, finance and accounting have a lot to add to marketing. If we can break down stereotypes, if we can break down silos and make everybody across the organization not only smarter, but looking at the same kinds of metrics, then that's got to be a great thing for shareholders.
So all the work thus far has basically been to value a single company. So we lay out a framework and then we apply it to a company. We want to show in the next paper that essentially you can apply this across many, many, many companies along two dimensions. One, it's not just rehashing the same analysis that we did for one company, 100 times over. It's really that there's a whole broad spectrum of data availability at these different companies, some that have disclosed a lot, some that have disclosed very little. And there's actually a whole heck of a lot of information that you can learn about those companies that may not have disclosed very much when you kind of look at the patterns across companies. So we want to bring all those companies together in what they call a Bayesian hierarchical model and be able to fill in a lot more of the blanks for companies where the data is not so good and apply this in a systematic way across all of them simultaneously.
Another big question is, what metrics should be disclosed? Right now, we're limited by what companies such as Dish Network choose to disclose, but are those the right kinds of metrics that investors should be demanding? And would it be the same kinds of metrics for every kind of business? So an important caveat of this work is that we've only looked at companies that operate in a contractual setting, where we sign customers up, they pay on some regular basis, and then they go, and the company knows that they've left. It's observable churn. So this model applies to pretty much any contractual setting, and that's great. But there's many companies out there, such as Amazon or a grocery store, where there's no formal contract, where people just kind of buy things on an occasional basis, and then there's this long gap, and the company is left wondering, is that customer gone, or are they just taking a snooze between purchases? If you're in a non-contractual setting, what would be the right kind of data that should be disclosed? Again, if you're an investor in a non-contractual company and you're pounding on the door of that company, what data are you going to be demanding for them to disclose? It's going to be different kinds of metrics. So we want to have a broader understanding about what are the right kinds of metrics that should be disclosed in different kinds of business settings, and then, of course, what kind of analysis would we lay on top of it in order to do the corporate valuation.